Hello, I'm Grace Colton, a member of East Shore Unitarian Church. This is the first in a series about the Widening the Circle of Concern report put out by the Commission of Institutional Change in June of 2020. You have read a bit about the report in the pre-reading, and the report has seemed to have escaped the trash can. It was featured at General Assembly 2020. Articles are being written about it, and an implementation guide has been written for congregations. At this date, in February of 2021, 33 have engaged with it so far. The Church of the Larger Fellowships, VUU, Voices of Unitarian Universalists, has done a series on the Widening the Circle Concern report. The Widening the Circle describes the larger context that Unitarian Universalist churches are in and what Black, Indigenous, people of color as a group within our faith are experiencing while they're in our faith. The report gives context for Unitarian Universalism's racism and white culture, explains the present, and offers what we need to do for the future to be anti-racist. I'm giving you an overview of two sections of Widening the Circle of Concern, the Theology and Living Our Values in the World sections. Please feel free to take notes and journal how you are feeling about what you are hearing in this video. Because as I talk, you are going to have some type of emotional reaction, like you don't get it, or that's not what I experience, or oh, I get it now, or yes, I've experienced or witnessed that happen. If you think you're feeling nothing as you watch the video, consider that your feelings tend to show up first in your body. So notice and write down what in this video makes your body react. Do you stiffen or take a breath or hold your breath? Grip your hand maybe. Does your heart beat faster or your mind go blank? Note where that reaction happens, at what point in the video it happens. You can go back later if you need to figure out what got to you and why. Here is an outline of what I'll be going over in this video. After the introduction that I just completed, we'll do a meditation, a reflection. I'll summarize the Theology and Living Our Values sections. They each have a background and trends section in the report. I'll be summarizing that. Then there'll be a break, and then I'll go into the takeaways that the report offers for both theology and for living our values in this world. Now let's do a 1-minute grounding meditation of breathing in and out slowly for about a minute to leave behind our day and center ourselves. Make a transition to being open to receiving a perspective that may be different from our own. Breathe out for longer than what you breathe in, and makes your body comfortable. Your eyes closed if you like, and I'll start counting and I'll drop out. And when a full minute is over, I'll let you know. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In. Last time. Let's center with a prayer that reminds us to put Black, Indigenous, people of color's perspective in the center of our thinking about being Unitarian Universalist. If you have a chalice, please join me in lighting it. This prayer was from a Sunday worship service centering the voices of Black Unitarian Universalists during the Promise and the Practice campaign of 2017. The campaign centered Black UU voices by offering worship materials written by people of color and asking member churches to donate their offering money to Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, or otherwise known as BLUE. BLUE is an organizing collective of the UUA, Unitarian Universalist Association. The reflection is Toward a Place of Wholeness by Reverend Viola Abbott of Coastal Virginia UU Church. We are Unitarian Universalists. We lift up our 7 principles. Some of us think of them as a form of theology, but they are more important to BLUE than that. They tell us what we should believe. They tell us how we should be. They tell us how we should act in the larger world and with each other. We are brought here today by the truth that Unitarian Universalism has shifted course to move toward a place of wholeness. It has been a long and sometimes unforgiving road to today, but we are here today because we are mindful of that past and because we have hope for the future. We want the practice of this faith to be a fulfilling manifestation of its promise. Open your hearts, seek new ways of understanding. Widening the Circle of Concern has composite stories. I'm going to read one of them. The Commission created 5 that they called avatars in the report. The term avatar comes from Hinduism, meaning the incarnation of a deity. Its use in the report can be considered a misappropriation, so I haven't used the term. The stories represent themes that had strong and consistent patterns in the Commission's research. They are composites of the testimonies that were submitted and also those that came out of the focus groups done in 2017 and 2018. In this way, the Commission could amplify themes in the testimony without endangering an individual's livelihood or community connection. Note that so many said they felt endangered by allowing the Commission to use their names that the Commission couldn't get enough interviews without anonymity. This is a description of a Unitarian Universalist Black Indigenous person of color's experience in UU spaces. This composite person is Jessie Anaya, an Afro-Latinx Indigenous person. She's queer and a boomer. Listen as I tell the story for how Jessie is perceived by others, first in her Unitarian Universalist church and later in the district and as a minister. Jessie writes, I came into Unitarian Universalism because I was queer. Sure, I no longer believed in the kind of God of the church where I was born. I probably would have stayed for the music and the people and community if I hadn't been a lesbian. That was non-negotiable in the church where I was born. When I came into my UU congregation as a congregant, someone asked me if I wouldn't be more comfortable down the street at the Catholic church. And on my second visit, someone asked if they could touch my hair to see how it felt. The message, though, of the faith, it spoke to me about how we all have worth and dignity. The service next week was about racial justice and immigration, and I wanted to come back. I have lived in a lot of places that were not too good at welcoming me. I was working as a sociology professor then, so I kept coming back and I brought my kids. Pretty soon, I was asked to be on the membership committee and then the religious education committee and the board. We had districts, a geographic grouping of the congregations, back then, and I was asked to be on that board as well. At my first district meeting, someone brought up their concerns that the site we had chosen for our conference was in a, quote, mixed neighborhood, and they wanted to be sure people would be safe. I lost it, and we had to call in a consultant from the UUA staff who seemed like she had never been part of a conversation about race before. When she got nervous, she used the term colored people instead of people of color. A couple of the other board members defended her, saying it was just words. I ended up taking over the session and facilitating the conversation. At the end, people understood a lot more about the experience of people of color in this nation. And by my next meeting, I was thinking that maybe I needed to be doing this for a living. When a job working for the district opened up, I applied and got it. My bilingualism was sometimes welcomed, but my biculturalism and my ideas on how to accomplish the objectives within my responsibility were consistently unwelcome. I had to visit a lot of churches. It was troubling the way that Black and African diaspora music is appropriated within UU churches, many times as a way to perform multiculturalism. Another disturbing thing is the way people of color are erased. For example, a church with 3 Black members might hear comments at congregational meetings, such as, quote, "We are an all-white church," unquote. And I cannot count the number of times I have objected when someone has said, quote, "Well, we have no diversity in this room," only to have the response be, "Oh, I mean Black people, real people of color." I had a lot of background in meetings, organizational development, and all that. One time I showed up to help a congregation deal with a problem with their finances, and an older white man from the finance committee said, "We don't need someone to talk to us about race relations. We need someone who understands the numbers." A younger board member stepped in and called him in. However, that incident and so many other little jabs stuck with me. My supervisor changed a couple of times, and then we did away with districts. I went to seminary and made my way through a reading list that had only a few authors of color then. My complaints and those of some of my classmates helped change the reading list. I went into mega debt to get through. For my first cycle of candidating, I was asked to candidate in 5 different places, but wasn't offered a call. I had to go back to consulting and also take a temp job to wait until the next cycle. It was the same thing, except I was called to a small congregation that had had 3 ministers in 5 years. They had no board policies and made a stink when I tried to get them to put some in place. I lasted there for 4 years, working around the clock. When I left, I knew I had made it longer than any of the last 3 ministers, but I was beaten up. One of my kids was a teenager then and got so sick of seeing what they did to me that she quit the faith. I took a job as an associate minister in a larger congregation. The senior minister has done some work, and I can call her on her stuff when it comes up. Someday I might want to try to be the number 1 again, but the way Unitarian Universalists have to always resist all authority, and the way they resisted my strong womanist style just wore out my last nerve. I think, looking back over my decade of involvement with Unitarian Universalism, that I was too polite for too long. Some of my younger colleagues of color come in now, and they are much more real. I get through my days, I do what I need to do, and sometimes I say what I want to say, like, "You sing songs without understanding the history, the pain, and the faith that birthed them. You change the words without understanding how that distinctly changes the meaning of our songs." Yes, a lot has changed. In a lot more congregations, people wouldn't try to violate my body or touch me or try to send me to another church. And every day, someone says something ignorant, truly ignorant, about someone who looks like my mama or my aunties or my kids. And that takes a toll. It really does. Why do I stay? Because what we believe is what I believe, and no color owns that. And because the young people coming in are fierce, and I can't help but want to see where that goes. Remember that Jesse's story is a composite of common themes that Black, Indigenous people of color told them. Look for connections between Jesse's story and the background and trends for theology and living of values that I'll go through next. I'm using annotated words for the report in this section. When I'm not using the report's words, I will let you know. Unitarian Universalism is a living faith. It's able to reflect current times and adjust over time. It's a tradition tied together by covenantal relations. We make agreements rather than dogma, which is unquestioned or undefended belief. Unitarian Universalism holds a vast range of practices, beliefs, and theological understandings. It can be said that contemporary Unitarian Universalism has 2 commitments: freedom of belief and its orientation toward inclusion, interdependence, and justice. These 2 commitments have shaped Unitarian Universalism in positive ways and led to some problematic dynamics. First, centering of the individual decenters the communal as a locus of theological exploration. Freedom of belief promotes diversity of thought in our communities and fuels the responsible search for truth and meaning that leads toward a beloved community. Beloved community is an ideal community of justice, peace, and equality for everybody. This freedom encourages exploration and experimentation, lending creativity and innovation to our communities. An unintended consequence is that individual search for truth and meaning has no accountability. Accountability means the obligation to explain, justify, and take responsibility for one's actions. So there has been no accountability to its impact in communities. The centering of the individual creates an inherent problem when you need to center a community. A question to think about is how strong or weak is community in our Unitarian Universalist theology? Another is, what are your theological connections with our existing Ishur covenant or with right relationship? The second problematic dynamic is the justice-seeking practices of Unitarian Universalists are often not grounded in spiritual or ritual principles. When this happens, justice-seeking replaces ritual and religious life. Justice practices cannot be used as surrogates for deepening our spiritual lives. Justice work has been a proxy for what we believe in some congregations, while in others it's been engagement with the intellect, debate, and social ties that have been the substitute. This situation leads us down the path of burnout. We need theological resources and spiritual practices for healing, sustenance, joy, and renewal. A note from me here is that Ishur has discussed this topic. Some feel social justice is purely a political pursuit. Others feel a spiritual connection to social justice. An outgrowth of that discussion was Ishur will be establishing a social justice fund with a portion of Holly House money. How should the use of that money be grounded in our principles? How have and do Ishur's social justice activists deal with burnout? I have a video that I want to show you that is of Leanna Gardner. She was executive director of Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism at the General Assembly in 2017. She's an example of someone who does have a spiritual connection to Unitarian Universalism while doing social justice work.
I just want to wrap up by talking about how my faith helps me make change outside of our denomination. Many people may know I was a core leader in the Black Lives Matter Minneapolis chapter for about 3 years. Yes, you can clap for that. That was a lot of work. But I have to tell you, it has been my blue family that has held me when I'm weeping, when I'm preparing to meet with the governor of Minnesota, with my Black Lives Matter Minneapolis folks, and other Black folks in Minnesota working for change. It is my faith that helps me speak truth to power. And when I talk about speaking truth to power, it is so difficult to look into the face of people who could stop the killings, the state-sanctioned murders of Black people, and have them tell you it's too hard, right? But these are my people that are being killed in the streets. These are my people, my family members, and it's not okay. And it is my faith as a UU, as a Black UU, that helps me be able to fight to keep Black people alive.
A third problematic dynamic is that many of us come to Unitarian Universalism seeking an alternate faith home and are drawn by Unitarian Universalist actions in the world. Yet we don't often work to heal from our religious past. A note for me is that only 10% of Unitarian Universalists were born into the faith. 90% came from other traditions. There's a lot of healing to do. A spiritual path makes personal healing possible. Back to the report. Also, those most harmed by the divisive and stressful times we live in are in need of faith tenets that can hold them fast and help make choices about how to engage. The national status quo of greater than and less than is reflected in our congregational and denominational lives. A note from me is that you could ask yourself, how is greater than and less than reflected at the UUA level? How at Ishur? Back to the report. To counter the status quo takes more than good intent. It takes a faithful commitment to a different way of being and accountability to our broader community and the world we seek to engage. A fourth problem dynamic is a common belief is that the only theological value we have is freedom to believe anything we want. I hear it from our Unitarian Universalist youth. I heard it growing up also. But the report says that this rejects any engagement within a community that challenges preconceptions. This belief goes against our history and what our spiritual ancestors sacrificed to leave us a tradition that values both freedom and commitment. An original Universalist belief was that we should work to establish the kingdom of God in this life, and a loving God would not condemn a portion of humanity to eternal damnation. This calls us to address issues of equity, inclusion, and diversity today. Unitarians have the tradition of discerning truth based on facts, reasoning, and investigation. This is how to find truth in yourself and the real truth of our lived world and sacred documents. This is the basis for looking at the issues of our current lives. Many people of color and other marginalized people the commission talked to mentioned the first and seventh principles as the ground for their belief that work for equity, diversity, and inclusion is religious work for Unitarian Universalists. A note from me is that the first principle is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And the seventh principle is respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. You could ask yourself, what do these two principles mean to me? How do I see them being practiced at Eastshore? The last problematic dynamic is continued learning and evolution should be the goal of all Unitarian Universalists. Yet we have not been investing enough in theology, theological schools, or theologians at a time when many who would bring new life and vitality to our communities are looking for guiding principles. When so many struggle to find meaning, a community formed through a set of commonly held beliefs can form a stronger bond than one formed through antipathy toward rejected beliefs. Because we haven't updated our theology, the history we know privileges the dominant culture and those voices that were preserved in our history and written record. We have such theologians and historians among us whose work would give us a different frame. Without investment in theology, theological resources to support these times are not available. A note from me is that some theologians cited in Beloved Conversations from Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities are James Cone, Howard Thurman, and Sophia Betancourt. You could ask yourself, what BIPOC people do you currently know who are theologians, spiritual guides? Who do you look to for spiritual insight and nourishment? And how many are BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color? The section Living Our Values in the World's Backgrounds and Trends are first, the work of becoming more equitable, inclusive, and diverse within our congregations is justice work. If we cannot do this well, we cannot be effective as justice partners. If we can't maintain good relationships with those most affected by injustice, we are not living our values. A question I'd offer to you is, what kind of relationship does Eastshore have with partners? Do you know who our partner organizations are? Number 2, greater awareness of the practices within our own institutions is complementary work to our justice work. A frequent criticism of this work is that people are tired of internal navel gazing instead of working on issues. Greater awareness of our own church practices complements justice work by making us accountable to our partners. Accountability helps us center groups unjustly treated, not by asking individual congregants to represent a group they are not a part of. A question you could ask yourself is, who could Eastshore reach out to and build a relationship with? Number 3, a principle of being a more accountable community is the ability to think in inclusive ways that are also non-binary or both and. You can work to make our institutions more just and work to aid others. If we fail to address our own injustices, we are not only hypocritical, but we are probably working out of an outdated paternalistic model of helping others rather than acting out of the recognition that our lives are interdependent with those of our neighbors. For example, The Commission frequently heard it should be focusing on climate change rather than anti-racism work. This is a false binary in the face of extensive research that climate change is already affecting Black, Indigenous, people of color communities more quickly than it is affecting other communities. We can learn from and take note of what BIPOC-led organizations are doing. A question you can ask is, how is this happening at East Shore? And number 4, our internal work as people of faith is to become more inclusive, equitable, and diverse, while our external work is to be accountable to those most affected by injustice. For us to be able to be good, accountable partners, we must do both. Internal work as people of faith is available at East Shore. There's Beloved Conversations starting up. You can register for this March, and this is a way to do internal work. Pathway to the Eighth Principle is a group looking at East Shore adopting the Eighth Principle. The Eighth Principle asks for accountable relationships. You can check our adult program listings for classes, such as Nicole's East Shore Ruins, based on the TV show Adam Ruins. Look at what meaningful movies Bellevue is screening. Those are examples. Our external work probably needs some attention. Possibilities in the future for East Shore are the use of the Holly House money and social justice partner relationships. The Commission heard repeatedly from BIPOC within Unitarian Universalism that too often our justice work is not grounded in our faith and our theological mandates. Many BIPOC Unitarian Universalists are already aware of this. And finally, new generations are interested in being part of organizations that are making a difference. An important recognition in today's justice landscape is that while we Unitarian Universalists may need to do restoration work to reduce the impact of inequitable distribution of resources, truly just and long-term justice work cannot be based in a charitable model that assumes that people of privilege have more knowledge of what is needed than those who have faced limited economic social opportunities because of discrimination within organizations, communities, and systems. For example, in late 2016, more than 500 clergy joined the Oseti Sakowin camp. This was an historic gathering of Indigenous nations to support the Standing Rock Sioux and other Indigenous leaders to oppose the Dakota Access Pipeline. It was a powerful experience for those able to follow orders from the Indigenous leaders. The Commission observed that this is not our usual way. All right, it's time for a body break. Please read this cartoon and take some time to take care of your own bodily needs. The video will run for a little bit, but you can pause and return when you are ready. The theological takeaways offered in the report are, first, our faith traditions as Unitarian Universalists require us to address equity, inclusion, and diversity issues. Faith and covenant are not dirty words. Our faith can be attractive. Covenant is a basic concept linking individual congregations to each other, to East Shore, to UUA, to UU Faith. Covenant is how we are accountable to each other, ourselves, and our values. If freedom and individualism are our most important values, we have little to offer in these times. We have too little community thinking at a time when people are coming into Unitarian Universalism looking for spiritual nourishment and support. The next generation expects multicultural and interracist skills in the organization they belong to. Next bullet. These times require a liberatory faith. And a note from me explains that a liberatory faith is applying religious faith by aiding the poor and oppressed through involvement in political and civic affairs. The report continues. These times require a liberatory faith that invites us each into the spiritual work of empathy and healing. Justice making is not a substitute for a coherent theology, and faithful justice making requires a liberatory theology. A note from me is, I think East Shore has had tension over social activism being spiritual or not. The report argues activism needs a theology in order to be sustainable. Next bullet. An articulation of what is commonly believed among us need not result in a creedal test for membership or involvement in our communities. A note from me. Based on this report, I'd say a test seems to be a concern for UUs. The report seems to say we can have a belief statement, otherwise known as a creed, without a test. We shouldn't confuse the two. Next bullet. Too many Unitarian Universalists do not know what saving and liberatory truths can be found within their faith tradition. I found my religious education lacked in this area. I have an ignorance of BIPOC theologians, writers, thinkers that are there to be found. Next bullet. We need to put greater emphasis on what it means to be bound to one another in an interdependent web and in keeping with our covenantal tradition. The seventh principle expresses the interdependent web connection. And East Shore's covenant. Does your team committee covenant? A greater emphasis on the theological basis for our work for diversity, equity, and inclusion will help us to make decisions about the forms of this work most appropriate for our individual and shared faith lives. Living our values takeaways. Our theology calls on us to respect the worth and dignity of all, and that is the foundation for our justice work. That foundation, along with our understanding that we are bound together, means that we need to center justice work in accountable partnerships. The next item, number 2, the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion should be applied to all areas of justice work, including climate change. I'll comment here that intersectionality exists. Number 3, accountable partnerships are dependent on our ability to educate ourselves and avoid microaggressions. A note from me, indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group is a microaggression. The practice of making only a perfunctory or symbolic effort to be inclusive to members of minority groups is tokenizing. So this bullet reads, accountable partnerships are dependent on our ability to educate ourselves and avoid microaggressions, tokenizing, and other forms of modern racism. Number 4, accountability in our justice work should be to organizations with which we have partnerships. We should not ask individual members of a particular racial or ethnic group or other groups such as transgender individuals to serve as our accountability partners. I'll offer a question to think about. Have we done that at East Shore? Asked individuals, people of color, to be accountable partners instead of asking organizations? Number 5, anti-oppression work is a necessary foundation for justice work. Younger people want meaningful volunteer opportunities consistent with their values. They are also more sensitive to the need to empower those most affected by the issues that we face and less likely to want prescribed top-down solutions. This sort of accountable justice work requires ability to be in authentic relationships with others, and this means relations across differences. I'd like to close with a short video clip of Naomi Klein at General Assembly 2020. She is a social activist and social commentator. She was the Ware Lecturer at last year's General Assembly. In the clip, she is asked a question by UUA President Susan Frederick Gray. What message does Naomi Klein have for Unitarian Universalists?
Any words you have for us as Unitarian Universalists?
You know, I would just say that this is your moment. You know, this is that your principles, as I mentioned, are visionary, and the world is catching up. And so I think that it can be really lonely to be voices in the wilderness, you know, talking about these unpopular ideas for a long time. But I think one of the things that's really important for people to understand is actually that they're popular. and that's hard. Like if you've been at it for a long time and, you know, and been told that these ideas are marginal and fringe, it can be very jarring to suddenly realize that they're popular enough to win, right? But they are. that this is, and I hope that people took away from my lecture, that there is an incredible shift going on right now. People get that the system is broken ecologically, economically, socially, and are ready for deep change. And that is what is so amazing about the movement for Black Lives, that the demand is so transformational. And I think, there's lots of worry about all the ways in which it's being co-opted, but truthfully, if the movement sticks to those demands, it's not really co-optable, because you can't defund the police, you can't end the carceral state unless there is a massive restructuring and a period of profound realignment, right? Where we build an economy from the ground up that starts with the need for care and repair. So I think that in the UU community, you have not been afraid to have those hard conversations, right? And I think there's a really important role to be played right now in terms of reparations, and showing spiritually the benefit, really.
Recommendations and actions are in the report. I didn't include them here because of the need for more people to be in conversation before we do something. We have internal work to do, and maybe a pandemic is a good time to do it. But that work is individually and as a church. Individual resources for internal work are beloved conversations materials, your fellow congregants and staff members who can refer you to resources. There are ongoing church programs such as East Shore Reads series and Nicole's East Shore Ruins series. And Google searches are very productive. You can partner with staff through conversation, letting them know what you wish would or could happen, and ask them to sponsor a team with an anti-racist purpose. If a specific action in the report attracts you, approach a staff member or an East Shore committee or team about working on it. Let Nicole know you want to hear about opportunities available through the Unitarian Universalist Association. The Commission recommends the regions of the UUA promote education to congregants who want to be good allies. So look for those opportunities by checking the regional websites and uua.org. Seek out and learn about Black, Indigenous, people of color organizations in the UUA, such as BLUE, Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, and DRUM, Diverse Revolutionary Unitarian Universalist Multicultural Ministries. They hold online events and have mailing lists. Explore the idea of adopting an eighth principle in which building a beloved community and dismantling racism and other oppressions are aspired to. Widening the circle of concern can be viewed as the curriculum and the eighth principle as the commitment. There is a team forming at East Shore, Pathways to the Eighth Principle, who is starting to look at that possibility. You could check out that group by contacting me or Nicole. I mentioned an implementation guide available for congregations and some online workshops for teams working on implementing the report church-wide. It's for congregations that are already in conversation about the Widening the Circle of Concern report. They have a wide enough conversation going on. They've taken it in and are ready for action. I'll close with a reflection. This is adopted from Reverend Elizabeth Tarbox, a Unitarian Universalist minister in Massachusetts. She wrote, "And so I say, ours is a story of faith and hope and love. I say it is our need for one another that binds us together, that brings us laughing and limping into relationships and keeps us at it when we otherwise might despair at the fix we are in. I say it is the holy we need, the eternal beyond our comprehension, and one place we can find it is here, working and worshiping together. And I say there is a transcendent value worthy of our loyalty, upon which we may set our hearts, and its divine manifestation is love." Thank you.